And we are rolling again.
Let's talk about the expectations the people who made the internet had when they first made it.
What were they thinking? What were they thinking when they were developing the internet? Well, so the first point is we should scroll back to the fact that the computers in those days, when they started the internet in '69, I started in '64, so only 5 years later, computers had gotten a little smaller, but they were still huge, and they were still rare. So, you know, there were some at universities, and you know, big corporations, insurance companies, and so forth would have them. But you know, there were whole, you know, states that had no computers, or you know, they had one computer at the state house, or you know, whatever. I mean, it was very, they were few and far between. So the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency that funded computer research following the Sputnik push to develop technology in late 1950s, was funding researchers to connect the machines together. I believe that their idea initially was to just allow the computers to talk to one another. The idea, I mean, everyone became very aware that you read in your cards on one machine, about what they had teletypes, so they weren't doing cards so much, but their cards were still around. And then they would basically connect, then they'd have to sort of move that document or those bits to another machine, and they'd have to do it physically. I mean, it was necessary to, you know, print out tape, or you know, magnetic tape or paper tape or something like that, cards, carry it to someplace else, and started to put it on that machine if you wanted that machine to have the same data. So I think that the original idea was driven more than anything else by allowing computers to share information, so that you could have a common resource, many machines all having the same data available. And that was, you know, so really all they needed to do was to connect them together and get some bandwidth between the machines, allow them to communicate with each other. So that was the original idea, and I think and that took a while to get that down. This is, I explained the technology. It's got some complication, and TCP/IP wasn't available right away. I mean, it took a while to get that whole scheme sort of optimized to be really good. But early on, it was just simply a question of being able to connect the machines. And really, they had very few stunts. Email was one thing, early application, and the ability to log into another computer, remote login, was another facility that was supported early on. So it was possible to be at a computer at one university and log into an account that you had at another university. And that was thought to be a very valuable asset. Although I think in retrospect we don't do that much now, because we really tend to stay logged in where we are. You know, we do remote connections all the time using the internet and so forth, but we don't actually, we usually have some agent or at the server at the other end that takes care of us. We don't actually physically, each of us doesn't have to physically log in. So I think that their main goal was mostly just to connect the machines together. And of course, once you develop a new technology, then it's very quickly, you know, people figure out, oh, well, there's something they could do. So, you know, after email was developed and remote login was developed and so forth, there became, you know, little bulletin boards where, you know, people could post information and so forth. And, you know, we see that still today. But, you know, the community was tiny, and of course it was all geeks. So, you know, everybody was, you know, keeping track of what was going on, and who had made a recent video game that was fun to play, and stuff like that. So it was, there was a small community, and you know, little by little, things moved along. I think, though, it was very much remained in the, what I would describe as research community for a very long time, probably 10 or 15 years. And slowly, National Science Foundation took over the management of it from the Defense Department, and it became, it sort of split up. At that point, there was a military network, and which there still is, and also sort of civilian network run by NSF, and they promoted a lot more use across universities, so the scientists and so forth could get access to it and share information. And you know, it started to take off at that point, a wider population of users, until really the mini computer came along, and eventually the personal computer and then that just had this really abundance of machines, and there was this sort of explosion. I guess somewhere along in the research days of the internet, TCP/IP came along so that you could connect networks to networks, because it was very common for a group of people to set up their own network, but then you'd want to be able to communicate with other people as well. So the network of networks is what the internet is, and that was required when you started getting pretty good sized numbers. When it was just 2 dozen users in 1975 or 80 or whatever, you didn't really need very much. Well, not too many people were using it. It couldn't be used for very much. And you didn't really need very, very robust protocols, because everybody could run the identical software, because they probably all owned the identical computer. But in those days, when it became clear that people would have their own networks that had to be connected together, then that was when TCP/IP became the dominant technology.
Do you think they had any idea that it would become so ubiquitous?
Well, I think they didn't even believe that it would. The original developers, I mean, you'd have to ask Khan and Cerf what they thought. But I think, and the people who did the original construction, the Khan and Cerf did TCP/IP. But you'd have to ask them. But I think they really saw it as just cool technology that they were working on. I mean, they're computer people, right? So they were having fun doing that. I think the Defense Department saw it as an essential ability that computers should have. That was why they were funding it. It's true. It's an essential capability. But I don't think people right away saw that many opportunities to use it. It didn't do that much, very much at the beginning. But it was able to ship data around, and very quickly scientists saw that shipping data around was a pretty useful thing to do. So, and communicating. I mean, people were using email. So it became ideal that that there would be like the civilian use of it too. And once that sort of recognition happened, then it kept going. But I don't think, still it remained largely in the, I would say, technical community now, not just the defense community or the research community or whatever, until the web came along. And then, even though people were connected and sending emails and so forth long before the web, it is true that by that point everybody had a personal computer, and then everybody had stuff they wanted to see and do using the web, and that immediately caused a huge explosion.
So explain the distinction between the internet and the web.
Sure. So the internet and the web are not the same thing. So the internet is basically the wires, your connection, say, to your ISP, and then all of the wires that connect the routers and move these little packets from, our home to, here to there.